Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Obviously, I'm Karen Onthank. This is Jeffrey Barber, and we want to thank you, Ginny and Stephen at Future Earth, for your generous support for our Phasing In and Out POI project.
Use this.
Okay. Um, our organization is the Integrative Strategies Forum. We're a sustainability research and policy organization based just outside of Washington, D.C., and just a few miles from the house where Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring. Rachel Carson is one of our most influential environmental communicators and an inspiration as to just what one person can do to make a change. For more than 30 years, ISF has been exploring and promoting transitions to sustainable production and consumption systems and practices. At the same time, the global temperatures continue to rise, passing the critical 1.5 degree limit highlighted in the Paris Agreement, resulting in extreme wildfires, flooding, sea level rise, not to mention the spread of microplastics and other impacts. A finger points back to the fossil fuel industry and the many sources of its emissions, defended and rationalized by its emissaries. Many call for phasing out the consumption and production of fossil fuels, a huge leap from simply lowering emissions, but in the long term, it happens naturally. In the meantime, future generations get the especially bad impacts of climate change. However, we need to think about what comes after phasing out fossil fuels and phasing in sustainable post-fossil fuel systems and practices. What would this look like? How do we imagine this systemic transformation? How do we imagine the transitions involved? How do we imagine and communicate the transition to sustainable post-fossil fuel futures? And that's the purpose of the POI project, mapping frames, concepts, and strategies across knowledge action networks and communities of practice on phasing out fossil fuels and phasing in a more sustainable post-fossil fuel future. One of the areas we are exploring is popular culture and its various representations of climate change, fossil fuels, and the future. How does popular culture portray the future? As the environmental movement and policy discussions have evolved over past decades, so has cultural production and consumption of narratives and imaginaries of alternative futures. Unfortunately, they tend to be mostly apocalyptic, dystopic, techno-fantasy, and a very small number of ecotopian story worlds. Behind each of these story worlds are assumptions about technology and economic growth, in dialogues on ecological limits versus limitless economic growth. Where among the many scenarios and narratives about the future do we find imaginaries of post-fossil fuel futures that inspire action and engagement rather than anxiety and depression? There are demands for a different climate change message, portraying hopeful but plausible stories beyond disasters, dictators, and magical solutions.
So that's me over there, imagining how that phasing in phase plays out technologically, politically, and culturally, and how each of us is affected and engaged in this process is, of course, a critical challenge for all of us. And as the International Panel on the Information Environment has pointed out, the global conversation on climate change is no longer about carbon, it's about credibility. And we have this escalating problem of disinformation by corporations, governments, and political groups, eroding public trust, policy progress, and frankly, our democracies. The wide range of organizations and networks are involved. You know many of them, and there are many more. And there are the funders, the investing in the financial resilience of the fossil fuel industry through climate skepticism and denial. The craft of newspeak in the 21st century enjoys and employs new tools, the internet, social media, memes, bots, hacker networks, and digital audience targets. Introduction of Fox News in 1990 marked a historical amplification of neo-newspeak media politics. Today, a thriving industry generating increasing distrust and disinvestment in the many sustainability initiatives and organizations, which this CoCo group, working group, and others celebrate. So in the U.S. and other countries, this has been a war of narratives over the power to shape the future. And we continue to ask, what and where are sustainable future narratives? So one of the goals of the POE project is to produce a video featuring some of the frames, concepts, and strategies employed in engaging the wider public in phasing out fossil fuels. One of our goals in the POE project is, I already said that, didn't I? So we've been mapping the intertwined environmental, political, and popular cultural histories and futures, looking especially for the elusive sustainable future narratives. Over the years, we've been identifying and engaging with a range of different knowledge networks and communities of practice, especially those exploring different communication strategies and narratives of post-fossil fuel futures, such as Break Free from Plastic, an international civil society activist network campaigning for a plastic pollution-free future. ISF has been working with Break Free from Plastics and a coalition of civil society, indigenous, and frontline communities engaged in the Global Plastics Treaty negotiation, which, as you know, have stalled due to standoffs between the ambitious and like-minded delegates. In this process, ISF has been especially noting the rhetoric and narrative war and its overwhelming presence and influence of industry lobbyists. The other thing which continues to surprise is the wide gap in attention among many organizations to the linkages between climate change and plastic pollution, two sides of the problem of phasing out fossil fuels. So we've been engaging with members of the International Environmental Communication Association, the IECA, a global community which began in 2011, committed to nurturing understanding and practice that moves the world toward environmental sustainability for all. The IECA publishes the Environmental Communication Journal as well as the Handbook of Ecocultural Identity, which may especially interest CoCo working group members. And next May, ISF will be presenting at the Rhetoric Society of America's 2026 conference in Portland, Oregon, inviting conversations on phasing out and in from rhetorical perspectives, especially among climate rhetoric members. Now, these three communities take us to this other dimension of sustainability communications, popular culture, and the environmental humanities. The Association for the Study of Literature and Environment, ASLE, launched the same year as the Earth Summit, organizes biannual conferences, and publishes the journal Interdisciplinary Studies in Literature and Environment Isle. ASLE members continue to cultivate the interdisciplinary field of eco-criticism in literary and cultural studies, as well as promoting the evolving domain of environmental humanities, taking place in ASLE chapters across the world. Finally, we approach the community which championed the serious study of popular culture, the Popular Culture Association, the PCA. They published the Journal of Popular Culture, and coincidentally was founded the same year, 1970, as the first Earth Day, the launch of the EPA, NOAA, and the Clean Air Act of 1970. The PCA has regional chapters around the world. And it's in 2023, ISF began chairing the ecology and culture area within the PCA, where we organize panel sessions, roundtables, and discussions on ecocultural issues and methodology. Our ecology and culture area brings an ecocultural lens and inquiry methods to describing and assessing post-fossil fuel future narratives and other narratives. And our 2026 Ecology and Culture call for papers highlighted our focus on post-fossil fuel futures and utopian imaginaries in popular culture, with panel sessions and a multi-area integrative roundtable on climate change and popular culture taking place at the PCA conference in Atlanta, April 8th through the 11th. And that's where we stop. So under 15 minutes. We've been practicing.
Thank you so much.
So much.
It is a very interesting topic that I'm pretty sure you have much more examples like to discuss even further. And we have this question in here that if you could please share the slides. You were sharing so many resources already that if you can just like the slide of the funders of climate skepticism or the books that you were mentioning, I'm pretty sure that everyone attending this session and even those who couldn't make it today but are going to watch the video will be interesting to learn about. So what happens now? Thank you for this input. And what we will do is to break into, I think, 2 breakout rooms, 2, 3. We are 13 participants to discuss what we talked about in here. Jeff, Karen, do you have any particular question that you think would be very interesting for us to talk based on the input that you shared with us?
Yeah, well, as you said, we want to make a video at the end of the year, which will be based on interviews with different people about communication, about the communication strategies involved in this idea of not just putting up solar panels and not eating meat and things and those kinds of things to reduce emissions, but this big idea of transforming the whole system, of really phasing out fossil fuels. That's a whole different kind of approach, and a lot of organizations can be divided along those lines. So we're interested in that. So the members of the working group of Future Earth also who are engaged in that, a lot of them we'd like to interview and would like to especially get leads or suggestions, recommendations of other kinds of strategies and projects and people who are engaged in that we might interview. And because we want to map out, here's these different kinds of approaches to take, and just provide that as a kind of a useful tool, pieces of information, whatever.
Thank you, Jeff. So maybe part of the discussion could be in what ways the activities that we are doing in our work also contribute, or like how many practices of like the ones that you're talking on narratives that can also be helpful or contribute to create these, let's say, phased out communication in which an ecotopia doesn't sound like the scary part because there is no drama, no conflict in there, right? So now we will have the next 10 minutes for this discussion. I just created the groups. Then we will be back in 10 minutes, okay?
Let's see. We had a really interesting and lively discussion in which we came to summarize two a bit different lines of experiences that we had, where we can see a positive narrative about alternative futures happening, and more sustainable futures happening. One, we said, was around the experiencing, like creating events, creating moments of community gathering and celebrating together concrete examples of sustainable living. We were talking about a festival that we are planning here in Italy at Via Verde, our outdoor learning lab and farm, for next summer, where we want to invite musicians from around the world and also combine it with potentially the Skorai conference, so have food for thought and food for the soul and food for the body, and have workshops in parallel, yoga sessions and so on. So this could be a possibility, or is a concrete lived experience of a small experience in a nutshell, where people we can celebrate pop culture and come together and yes, see the positive, what it can look like if we are all working together and coming together across cultures, across gender, across nations. And then we had Philippe, who was joining us, telling us about his research on the historical on the history of China, and actually the Tang and Qing dynasty, where they had a population collapse, but then also had through again a convivial cultural come together of tea parties. In that case, they revitalized a collapsed population and brought back momentum and a new positive outlook on that culture. So it's again a different view, a historical view of culture, but that shows this one thread that we discussed of experiencing and creating joyful get-togethers. So we don't feel alone, which is the strategy that often the fossil fuel industry tries to pursue, by burdening the individuals with the responsibility of doing something instead of systemic reactions. But by coming together, we can fight that this strategy of the fossil fuel industry. And then on the other side, we discussed social media. And there we kind of summarize that while we have a concern about social media is creating polarization in society, it does also, and creates bubbles. Within the bubbles, we see that it can create, again, a transcending or a sentiment of being a community that follows, for example, a peace movement or environmental activism, and you feel like you're not alone because you see so many other people doing something on that topic that you care about in the world. So it has both. It has the polarizing and the bubble, the echo chamber effect, but within your echo chamber, you actually do feel like you can dig deeper, you get more inspiration on a topic. Of course, it can be also on the other side of the polarization scheme, that the right wing gets more polarized and more motivated to work in that way. So the question is also how to bridge that and how to deal with this tension. Yes, Sorry for the long summary.
Thank you. Thank you,
But, yeah,
Valentina.
I'm curious to hear from the other group.
Yeah, other group. What were your insights? They were also would like to say something on behalf of the other group, because if you see in the chat, there were also some resources shared in there. And curiously enough, there was also a festival mentioned, but in your neighboring country, in Switzerland. Hans, you opened your mic. You want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to add some positive news because first we did a bit of doom scrolling, how the airplane flights are rising and how people seem to be less less open for making themselves part of the change, part of the wider Trumpism and so on. But in fact, I think there is still a lot of potential to participate in grassroots movements and maybe the kind of public's interest for activism is maybe kind of less at the moment, but when it has a positive connotation, the people still seem to be willing. And that's why I shared this link about the Films for Future documentary film festival, which has a record participation this year in Zurich. And it was not just watching those documentary films, very good discussions. And that somehow I felt very uplifting. And it's also part of kind of pop culture, which we all believe that it's really necessary to change the behavior of the wider public. Otherwise, it won't be possible, and we just stay part of a bubble.
Excellent. Thank you, Hans. Any other reflection? Because we were also talking about what is the worst that could happen when you reach bottom? You can, once you hit the bottom, it's just a matter of see how you come back to the top again, right? So we are living in a moment of change, in a moment of adaptation. I see, Jeff, you opened your mic. Anything you would like to share?
Yeah, the one of the things is like you have this war of narratives about what's real, and how things are going. And it was funny that one exercise was not exercise, but one example was like the way the administration and the news media was characterizing the upcoming No Kings March, which they were saying, oh, this is going to be a bunch of left-wing lunatics, and there's going to be all this violence and everything. There was like over 7 million people out in all these different places around the country. For us, we're on 16th Street, which goes down to the White House. Every Friday, there are people out there with signs, and we hear all these horns. So we know that between 5 and 6, we hear all these different horns because people are honking in response to these to all these different signs. But being part of that, which is knowing that this is going on all over, there's waiting for the right opportunities. And so I think the right wing is going to be breaking down by itself, and its destructiveness is going to have its own kind of effect. There will be this backlash. It's already starting to happen, but the question is like, what kind of ideas do we put forward? Can those radical ideas about change? We're getting near a certain time where that's going to come up. The question is like, have we really imagined it, or have we been so lost in our anxieties and depression that we haven't really thought about it that much? But I think we're going to see some big changes, hopefully in the right direction.
Thank you, Jeff. I think this is a very nice message to conclude today's session. Thank you so much to all of you for participating, to Karen and Jeff, to opening this can of worms about what is it that popular culture is telling us, and what is this connecting thread that we can all find. And I think one of the issues that emerged in all the conversations that we had, that is that even though things seem to be looking gloomy, there is hope, right? And what matters the most is to continue this dialogue going and to see against adversity, how can we put this positive outlook forward, that living sustainably is not about survival, but living sustainably is actually about the future that we could make happen, regardless that we can see what is happening out there, social media, fossil fuels, everything that we've been hearing over, I don't know how many decades already. So it is just a matter of carry on, right? Like not to fall into despair. And with that note, I would like to conclude this year's cross-pollination sessions. to wish you all like all the best for Christmas. Now back to the festive spirit and to invite you to stay connected. The video will eventually be made available. And of course, all the information that you are sharing here will be shared with our networks, like with the Scorai and Future Earth communities and with your own networks. Please feel free to spread the news, to pass the voice, because this is how we get the ball rolling, right? So thank you very, very much. And I wish you all the best, not only for this week, but also for the new year, because yay, next time we meet will be already in 2026, which for sure will be 10 times better than this one. Okay. So thank you very much, everyone. Let me just
Thank
stop the
you.
recording
Bye,
now.
everyone.